We're continuing our study of the Yoga of Integral Knowledge, Chapter 21, The Ladder of Self-Transcendence. And we finished the first paragraph of that chapter. And in this paragraph, we covered the basis of what Sri Aurobindo is leading to in terms of the bridging between what he has now in this paragraph introduced as the two hemispheres. So Sri Aurobindo is using these terms out of the Upanishadic tradition because that tradition has acknowledged this division into what he calls the lower half and the upper half, or the transcendent half and the non-transcendent half, parardha and aparardha. And the division between the two is something difficult, and that's the point that he's making over here, that we live our entire lives in the lower half. And in this division, we experience an ontology of separation. That is the foundation of our existence. We can know the world only through our own individual experience, which seems to be separated from all others. And the world appears to us through laws which we intuit through the mind, and yet which we don't have much control over. And so this is what has led us to at least open our possibilities to some kind of space of unity. That is even historically what in our times of modernity, we are scaling up that particular possibility of something that brings us into a state of understanding and unity. But the point he's making here is that in spiritual traditions, we have scaled those peaks and have known that half that he's talking about, the transcendent half. But even when we've known that, the separation has persisted. And this is a really important point. That's the point that is the take home of this first paragraph. Many schools have tried to wish away that separation by privileging the upper half over the lower half and actually erasing the truth of the lower half as if it does not exist, as if it is a phenomenal screen that can be removed and then we know the truth. But the point Sri Aurobindo is making is that from that vantage, we have a different kind of approach to the lower half. And that approach, if we relate the upper half to the lower half, is one that starts off by a kind of power of observation. One observes the lower half. But still, even in that transcendence, one does not fully participate in the lower half in terms of the upper half. This is the point he's making. Now, there are traditions that have approached that. So the traditions that have approached that have either tried to experience the bridge between the two in trance. So in a state of deep trance that has been called either Shushupti or Turiya, Samadhi, there is a state of knowledge which either wishes away the lower half and thereby experiences freedom, liberation, or grasps the equation, the equality, the self-becoming of the one without being able to participate in it. A partial participation is also possible in certain schools, as for example, world-affirming tantric schools that use the term sahaja. Sahaja is a opening of the upper hemisphere and a instrumentality of the lower by the higher without a full possession of the self of the higher. One becomes an instrument. And to what extent one becomes an instrument of the higher and how high is that higher is a question mark. This is the point in a nutshell that Sri Aurobindo is making. And he's also saying that even to get to that point of being able to rise to the higher from the lower is something that is not easy. It's not given. We don't have a clear approach to it. And he uses the term here that it takes a number of lifetimes before we can even make that approach. And last time we also considered this issue of a number of lifetimes because to many it seems just a cultural doxa that some people believe in. And then to some, it may seem like a daunting task. That is, the term was used last week, discouraging. So yes, indeed, it seems to be a cultural doxa, but in Sri Aurobindo's scheme, it's not only experiential, it is something that we can experience, but it also is an essential part of his metaphysics. And that is because in his scheme, the evolution proceeds in an individuated manner. It has to proceed in an individuated manner because that's how we experience the world. We don't experience the world as cosmic beings. We experience the world as individually separated beings. And if we are to realize these truths that he's talking about, it has to be as individually separated beings that cross the border between the separation and the unity. And for that, there has to be a persistence of the individual. The persistence of the individual is achieved through the reincarnation of something which remains from life to life. This is the central teaching of the Katha Upanishad. And so what Sri Aurobindo is pointing to is the fact that there is a gradual illumination of nature, what he's calling nature, Prakriti in the Sankhyan term, through the evolution of the Purusha. And this is challenging the traditional idea of Sankhya, to which there is no evolution of the Purusha. Okay? Through reincarnation, the Purusha illuminates more and more of the Prakriti, taking it into itself, and thereby entering into lives in which our understanding and approach of this division becomes clearer, and we can transit. So that is where we stand over here in this in this chapter, and we can continue from the second paragraph of that chapter, unless there's any questions, comments at this point, then we can move on. Okay, so we can start trying to. Okay. Linda, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, sure.
So this is page 466.
So we're at
All is determined by the spirit.
All is determined. Can you hear me okay? You can hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you. Yeah, we do hear you. Yeah.
Okay. All is determined by the spirit. For all from subtlest existence to grossest matter is manifestation of the spirit. But the spirit, self, or being determines the world it lives in, and the experiences of its consciousness, force, and delight in that world by some poise among many possible of the relations of Purusha and Prakriti, soul and nature, some basic poise in one or other of its own cosmic principles. Poised in the principle of matter, it becomes the physical self of a physical universe in the reign of a physical nature. Spirit is then absorbed in its experience of matter. It is dominated by the ignorance and inertia of the tamasic power proper to physical existence. In the individual, it becomes a materialized soul, Anamaya Purusha, whose life and mind have developed out of the ignorance and inertia of the material principle and are subject to their fundamental limitations. For life in matter works in dependence on the body. Mind in matter works in dependence on the body and on the vital or nervous being. Spirit itself in matter is limited and divided in its self-relation and its powers by the limitations and divisions of this matter-governed and life-driven mind. This materialized soul lives bound to the physical body and its narrow, superficial external consciousness, and it takes normally the experiences of its physical organs, its senses, its matter-bound life and mind, with at most some limited spiritual glimpses as the whole truth of existence.
So here Sri Aurobindo begins to draw out what he has been preparing so far in terms of what he calls here the ladder of self-transcendence, or what is it? Ladder of self-transcendence, right? And this is a necessary metaphysical idea that is also related to this notion of the evolution of Purusha in the individual, because both in terms of the cosmic, what he calls the planes of consciousness in this ladder of self-transcendence, and in terms of the reincarnations of the individuated aspects of that self-transcendence, we find that there is a certain kind of poise that we occupy from life to life. And this poise is, he has introduced this in the last paragraph, last chapter from the Taittiriya Upanishad as these rungs of Annamaya, Pranamaya, and Manomaya, and then Vijnanamaya and Anandamaya. These are the 5 rungs of the Taittiriya Upanishad. And here he introduces the first of them, the Annamaya, but also refers to the other 2, that in an evolutionary manner, And that is one of the, you may say, innovations of Sri Aurobindo to the Indian tradition. That these may be considered static planes of consciousness, but they are experienced by us in an evolutionary manner. And not only by us individually, but by us cosmically. This may be called the evolution of Prakriti. So the Purusha's evolution, that is the evolution of the individualized soul, traverses a evolution of cosmic nature. This evolution of cosmic nature is unfolding these planes of consciousness that he's talking about and situating each in the other, bridging them as it goes along. That's the point he's making, that each of them is a independent poise that can remain exactly what it is. In other words, it's like often in paintings, in Tibetan paintings, and also in tantric paintings in India, you see these worlds that are stationed one above the other. These worlds that are independent worlds or planes of consciousness or dimensions, if you want to call them that, may remain what they are. But we are the thread that strings these beads. That's the transition of the soul. And from world to world, there is built thereby a continuum. This building of the continuum is part of the process of the very meaning of this scheme or schema. This is what Sri Aurobindo is saying over here. So from that point of view, we include and transcend. And this is a certain idea that if we think about our relationship with the world today, this is a complex idea which some people find problematic. And they find it problematic because there are different ways to understand it. Some people call it the great chain of being. The idea of the great chain of being, which in the Western tradition has also always been present. You know, Jacob's ladder, for example, is an image of it in the Judaic tradition. The night journey of the Prophet in Islam traverses these planes. And then in Theosophy, it returns to us as this great chain of being. But there is a certain kind of understanding of it, which is an understanding of hierarchy. So we seem to have a hierarchy of consciousness from matter through life, through mind, through other planes. And it places the human at the top of the scale. This has been called anthropocentrism, the centering of the entire scheme in the human, and the subordination of planes under the human, the planes of the animal, for example, or of non-living things. And there is a certain kind of a colonial guilt in the Western world because of the history of the West, which easily translates itself onto the scheme and refuses it on the grounds of its own guilt. See? That, in a way, would rather not have any kind of evolution than the idea that there are rungs that have evolved from other rungs on the grounds that thereby there is a sense of superiority and hence of subordination of those that have led to higher rungs of the hierarchy of consciousness. But one thing which is sort of important to understand here is that this complex idea is not an idea of differences in kind. It is not that matter or life or the non-living entities or living but non-human entities of the world are other than the human entities of the world. They are other expressions that have, in a sense, as far as the Prakriti is concerned, or the nature is concerned, expressed other ranges of consciousness. But they are the same being. This is the point he's making right from the first sentence of this paragraph. All is determined by the spirit, for all, from subtlest existence to grossest matter, is manifestation of the spirit. So there is, as it were, nobody who is less spirit than anybody else. This is the soul nature relationship that is being experienced by spirit. Spirit is experiencing and exploring its own manifest properties in a gradual scale of self-manifestation. And see that the fact that the experience of itself as self is the same all along the scale is the great leveler. See? But there are problems. The reason Sri Aurobindo is making this entire schema is that the access to the spirit is greater or less depending on the amount of freedom that Prakriti allows to the spirit. The reason that even the human can experience that which is outside, but not participate fully in the energies of that in nature, is because the evolution of nature is incomplete in the human, just as it is incomplete in other rungs before the human. This is the underlying point he's making over here. All is the one being, but the one being is self-manifest in different degrees of consciousness depending on the kind of relationship it has self-determined with its own potential for expression, experience and expression. So we have over here this gradual integration of the planes that is naturally going on through the evolution of Prakriti. And in that statement that is implicit in this paragraph is also implicit the epigram with which this entire book begins. All life is yoga. All life is yoga because it is the yoga of nature, of Prakriti, trying to build through its relation with Purusha a bridge that will integrate the whole of the Prakriti with the Purusha. And that is the emergence of the next plane of consciousness in nature that it has been in preparation for.
Elishish, I have a question.
Sure.
You speaking about the different planes of Prakriti, but the Purusha as well would have different striations, like the Chaitya Purusha, Antaratman, things like this that would be built into that, that hemisphere as well. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about navigating those differences of degree.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So here Sri Aurobindo has not fully developed what you're talking about, which is something that he develops practically, in his teaching of yoga. And that is exactly related to what Prakriti allows. See, that's the reason why when we are saying that there are different poises, in each of these poises, Purusha is self-manifest in that particular layer of Prakriti in a qualitative self. See? So we have a Annamaya Purusha, that is a physical Purusha. But that physical Purusha is still Purusha with a capital P, that is self-manifest under the conditions of matter. Similarly, that self-manifest Purusha does not, or self does not disappear when the integration with the next layer takes place, which is that of the Purusha in life, or the Pranamaya Purusha. So that, on the other hand, which is moving through these planes, is a more essential Purusha. That is the Purusha whose self-projections, operational self-projections within the Prakritic layer of consciousness is the Purusha stationed and stabilized in that particular layer of consciousness. That's why we talk about physical Purusha, vital Purusha, etc. But behind physical Purusha, vital Purusha, mental Purusha, etc., is what you just mentioned as Chaitya Purusha. Now, this Chaitya Purusha is what Mother and Sri Aurobindo called psychic being. In the Upanishadic tradition, it is known as the inner self, Antaratman. Antaratman. But even in saying inner self, of course, if we look at the early Upanishads like the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the term Purusha is used in the singular. It is not qualified as, some Purusha, Manomaya Purusha, Pranamaya Purusha, etc. It's used in the singular with a reason, because it is the same being. See, Sri Aurobindo does differentiate these beings because there is an operational difference. The reason the Upanishads are using it as the same being is that, in a sense, the Upanishads are not drawing out a yoga in which there is a synthesis of these various planes in a kind of a waking life. They're not making it clear. They're talking about the self, which is behind all these selves. But the reason Sri Aurobindo is talking about them is that they exist and continue to exist in us. Now, practically speaking, there is another reason for this, and that has to do with what more contemporary philosophies have called transduction. Transduction relates to the fact that differences in kind can bridge their difference because there is an essential monism behind them. All that exists, whether at the non-human or non-living layer, is the spirit, as he's pointing out. And we may even think about it in a panpsychic way as individualized forms of spirit that have experienced capacities and expressed capacities that are different. So physical capacities, mental capacities, etc. But they can communicate because there is the same self behind them, though the capacity of expression is limited, but there is the same self. And thereby that's the reason why we can communicate with them. They can communicate with each other. Otherwise, we'd be left with a situation where this is the problematic part of the whole thing. That, I mean, for example, there are traditions that will tell you only human beings have souls. Animals don't have souls, or non-living things can't have souls. So these kind of ideas relate to differences in kind that are absolute. While over here, there is no difference in kind that is absolute. There is a difference in degree related to that which continues through them and experiences and expresses various capacities of itself. Kika.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could elaborate on the real meaning of Prakriti here. What are we referring to as Prakriti? Because I mean, if we think of the sacrifice of the mother as the first sacrifice, which became conscious from the inconscient, and so that is one way of understanding Prakriti, that the inconscient Prakriti. And the other is, of course, the para Prakriti, the conscious Prakriti. So that those like two aspects of the Shakti. But something is moving here. Something is evolving or doing yoga. That means there is a movement. So when it has a movement, then there is a kind of some kind of degree of freedom within which it is moving. So so that freedom of what? Choice, or something of that sort. And is it there is another way of looking at Prakriti, as I see it, is the expression of the embodied soul through the word, in the sense that expression itself is shifting its choices and thereby evolving. So so all this.
Yes, indeed. So the second understanding that you proposed, that Prakriti is the expression of the soul that is moving according to its self-choice, is the view that Sri Aurobindo is presenting over here. See, that's what this paragraph is all about. But in our experience, we don't experience it like that because we don't see it like that. We don't have the vantage. That's the reason why in Taittiriya Upanishad, until you arrive at the planes of Vijnana and Ananda, you don't know what is the true relation. and you don't know this fact that you just talked about. That's why what Sri Aurobindo says metaphysically is only a speculation at the mental level, but it is a truth at levels above the mind. While if we take it at our level, it is from the other end that we look at it. And what you proposed is really the two ends. How do we look at it at the two, from the two ends? The sacrifice of Prakriti. So para Prakriti, and because Sankhya is an empirical system, they use the term Mula Prakriti for the inconscient nature. And yet inconscient nature for them is a mystery. Inconscient nature is the mother of all creation. And why or how does it create? Now so this is another scheme, just like you're talking about a scheme in which Prakriti is a self-manifestation of Purusha, according to its choice of expression or expressive capacities. This view is again a practical view of an empirical kind that is stating a different perspective on the same experience, a perspective from below. So according to that, it's a very interesting inversion of the system. They're pointing to the fact that if we look at it from below, and as you're saying, if we look at it from the sacrifice of Prakriti, now one way of thinking about it from the sacrifice of Prakriti is that Prakriti in its self-sacrifice is involuted and carries within itself a will to evolution. It's implicit in it because it is involuted, and it there we talk about Platonic memory. It carries always within itself the paradoxical memory of an origin to which it goes. It's not a memory, as we talked about last time, it's not a memory in past time, but a memory in perpetual time. So that is what is making it, that's the freedom that you're talking about, that is making it evolve. It knows that it's its own choice and its own self-perception that is causing it to evolve. But Sankhya, in its inverted scheme, puts it in relation with Purusha from the very beginning. So that's why it's saying that Prakriti in an Mula Prakriti in original form is in balance. It is balanced. It does not feel the need to move. And we may say that maybe at the very basis of matter, there is a condition like that. There is no need to move. It's in a state of pure inconscience in which its properties are all balanced. But if something enters it that causes a disbalance of its properties, something enters it from outside, and the outside has to be a difference in kind. So this something which enters from the outside, it's very interesting to, again, I talked about transduction. So to compare this schema with some thinkers like, say, Simon Don, he was talking about metastability of a medium. A medium is completely stable, but if it is in a state of metastability, in other words, it's balanced, but it is just waiting for something to touch it from the outside. As soon as something from the outside enters it, the balance is disturbed. So disturbance of the balance within it of the qualities of Prakriti is going to cause Prakriti to start generating movement. And there is a kind of a method to the movement. When you talked about freedom, there is a method to the movement, because the method to the movement is that there is an alien something that has entered me, and I have to become closer to that. So that alien something that has entered me, that I don't know what it is conscious. See, I don't know what consciousness is, but I have to move in such a way that I approximate consciousness and build the structures whereby consciousness can be equated with me, can come into relation with me in an equal manner. This is behind the evolutes of Prakriti in Sankhya. So this is the reason why Sankhya says that it starts evolving what they call the tanmatras, and all these elements and these properties of sensing, and then the inner instrument, antakarana, with the buddhi and the ahankara, approximating consciousness and bringing us to the limit condition of Prakriti beyond which there is Purusha. But there's always a gap. There is a kind of a difference in kind between the two. But these evolutes have led us to that point. This is the inverted view. The difference that Sri Aurobindo will make is that gap whereby the analysis of the evolutes of Prakriti can lead us beyond into Purusha is also only an evolutionary gap. We are here not to jump to Purusha, but to build that instrumentation. Between Purusha and Prakriti, which is the unfinished evolution of the human.
So it sounds like the evolution is really building not a body but a chariot through which you can transit back and forth.
Exactly, and that's why, Katha Upanishad looks at that very image of, what comes into Sankhya as the instrument as a chariot. This image of the chariot is the image used by the Katha Upanishad to talk about the same schema that Sankhya is using. I believe in a pre-Sankhya, way of enunciating the same thing. Sankhya turns it into a more manageable empiricism where we can have immediate freedom. We don't need to bother about these evolutions and all that. The other image that, that's, as you mentioned, what is Prakriti? That I think that's a really, very profound question. A whole dissertation can be written on this question. What is Prakriti, right? Because, even etymologically, Prakriti, Prakriti, right? Pra is the movement outwards, the objectification. And Kriti, the Kri Dhatu, which is behind work, behind creation, right? Creativity, to do, to will, all these sort of actions, in fact, action itself. So it is the tendency towards action, tendency outward towards action itself is Prakriti. Prakriti, in that sense, is the power of force or will of becoming at any level. So it is the medium itself that it is becoming as ontology, being as becoming. So what will be called Mula Prakriti in Sankhya? Sankhya does not use the term Para Prakriti. Para Prakriti is a term used in the Gita to nuance the idea of Mula Prakriti. It's exactly creating the opposite pole. It's used for the first time in the Gita, Para Prakriti. Here, behold, this is Prakriti, but here, behold, my Prakriti, which is Para Prakriti. Krishna is saying. So there we see this idea, implicit idea that Sri Aurobindo is going to field by talking about the sacrifice of Prakriti, the sacrifice of the Holocaust of the Divine Mother. That is the idea that Para Prakriti has become Mula Prakriti. In tantric terms, that is like saying that there is a cosmic kundalini, that the involute of the supreme Prakriti is this cosmic kundalini, which is, sort of imaged in certain traditions, like, for example, in Vaishnavism as Ananta Sesha, the serpent on which Vishnu, the preserver, sleeps. And the evolution of that is the cosmic evolution of cosmic Prakriti. That is actually what he's talking about here. Unfolding the rungs of matter, life, mind, etc. These are the coils of the Mula Prakriti as the involuted Para Prakriti. And always in relation, in an individual sense, with the Antaratman. But Antaratman, Sri Aurobindo uses the term Chaitya Purusha because Antaratman, this is another distinction that is introduced in a kind of a loose way in the earliest Upanishads. The distinction and relation between Atman and Purusha, people don't talk about it much. It's a very important distinction. Self and person are not the same, they're related. Self doesn't have power, it has only sense. Atman is self. Purusha is person. Person includes the essence of quality and of qualitative action. Purusha is always actually inclusive of Prakriti.
Actually, Purusha could be maybe it has come from the Pura, that is the house. So So basically I mean the divine in the house of Prakriti, like that is.
That's one. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, they give so many interesting etymologies of this term in different places. And one of them is that the Pura there is the Pura means fort. Pura there, it means fort. The dweller in the fort, the one who lives in the fort. And then another one is the one that burns whatever is in front. Pura means purva, that's that which is in front. Whatever it looks at, it makes a clearing. It burns whatever jungle there is in front and makes a clearing into which it may appear. Just a moment, Anastasia. Soonki has her hand up. Yes, Soonki.
Yes. Related to this interesting discussion on Prakriti, my question is, in Bhagavad Gita, Sri Aurobindo in essays on the Gita make a he seems to see that very important, you know, the distinction between life of jiva and the life of ego. And in my understanding, the life of ego seems to include the life of the lower triple purusha, and the life of jiva, it may be like some sort of the psychic being's engagement kind of started, then the level of life becomes the life of jiva. And so the distinction related to what you have just explained to us, the distinction between the life of jiva and the life of ego. Yeah, would you give me a little more comment on it?
Yeah, so in Sankhya, ego is mentioned, but it's interesting that in the notion of ego as ahankara, the term ahankara literally means maker of self, and that is being placed just below buddhi. So it's actually lower than buddhi in the evolutes of prakriti according to Sankhya. In other words, there is something that is giving us sense of separate self. The definition of aham, of course, the term aham is used also variously in Indian tradition. Aham is used in Shaivism as Atman, basically. They've just used aham as the supreme self with a capital S. And there is no exclusiveness there, you know. Ahamta, param ahamta means supreme sense of self is also paramatman in the Upanishadic tradition. But when Sankhya uses the term aham, ahamkara, it's sense of self in the ignorance, as you said, belonging to matter, life, and mind. The construct of that is coming from the mind, according to Sankhya, right? Because below that, we have a sense of self, but it is really a mental project. The sense of self that what we are calling ego or aham is differentiated from the sense of self that you talked about, which is the true self, right? The true sense of self. The main difference is what we just discussed, the ontology of separation. The ontology of separation, that from bottom up, if we look at why we think of ourselves as separate beings, we have different answers to that question. First, we see ourselves, we sense ourselves as separate, completely separate, because we are cut out of matter. This is what the Greek tradition calls hylomorphism. Hylomorphism belongs to the body, This is a paradox because the body seems to feel as if it is cut out of matter. We are kind of special cookies that are sort of cut out of a cookie cutter, which is not uniform. It's a little defective. So each cookie is a little different. So that kind of a sense of self that is the separate form that we all experience to be ourselves is the physical layer of what you're calling the ego. Similarly, there's a vital layer which is connected with this physical layer as my attachments to my desires, needs, wants, affects, in an exclusive sense related to this form that I call myself. And again, the same with the mental. My thoughts, my preferences, my ideas, my belongings, my choices. So all this is held, as it were, by a tapas of separation. It's very difficult to escape. This is the point, one of the things that he's saying over here, that we can escape in deep trance. Sometimes we lose the sense that we have a body in meditation, for example. And then it's difficult to tell who I am. You know, that interesting, famous experience that Vivekananda gives about when Ramakrishna touched him for the first time. He said, everything started spinning around me and I started losing the sense of myself as this body. And I said, what are you doing to me? I have a family, I have parents. So you see, he's trying to pull back into himself this identity construct of who he is as a separate individual that's getting lost. This getting lost is it can happen in moments of deep meditation, trance, etc. But whenever we are back, it's very difficult to get rid of. We are tightly bound by our bodies and the construct of life and mind that are inextricably connected with the body. So this is the aham. But what Sri Aurobindo is saying is that we also have another sense of self. Now you use the word jiva, and Sri Aurobindo is in his schema making a distinction between jivatman and antaratman. Jiva is equated to jivatman for him. And this distinction is made in the Gita as well. It's made in a subtle way. They are also talking about antaratman and jiva. So jiva is jivatman. So it is a kind of, you know, if you're talking about these cookie cutters, it is, or the cut cookies, it is the idea of cookie. Each one of us has an idea self that is outside our specific manifestations in a body, in a life. But we also have that which has entered into this world and this self and is behind the construct of self that is associated with our exclusive ontology of separation. Is Jivatman is timeless. Now, Sankhya has no place for this, and Vedanta has a place for Antaratman, but has no place for a Antar Purusha. Its use of the term Purusha includes it. That's where, as Keka was saying, if we take Purusha in the definition of that which is the dweller of the fort, Pura, inside the fort is the self. If we look at it like that, then yes, that's what they're talking about. The Purusha that is within. The Purusha no larger than the thumb of a man seated deep in the cave of the heart. That is an image of Purusha. It's a flame. It's a dynamic power. It's not just a self. Jiva in its more popular usage can be translated as creature, living being, living individual. But in its philosophical use, Jiva is equated to Jivatman, that is the essential self of the individual, essence of self in the individual.
So the idea that the sacrifice of ego and the sacrifice of Jivatman, that could you say a little more about that? The subject of sacrifice, I mean, who do the sacrifice? Ego does, and then Jiva does. So how can you understand that distinction?
Ego does, it's not a that. So when we're talking about sacrifice, the whole notion of sacrifice, as Sri Aurobindo uses it, is founded on, in his understanding, two sacrifices. And in his case, first, he says, the original sacrifice is the sacrifice of Paraprakriti. And the consequence, and this is mothers as well, right? According to the mother, first, there is the sacrifice of spirit as nature that creates the polarities. And then there is the sacrifice of the transcendent into the polarities. This is the sacrifice of Purusha. The sacrifice of Prakriti and sacrifice of Purusha. And that is experienced in us. See, we are the sacrificed complex of Prakriti and Purusha. Because we are experiencing the involuted condition. Anastasia, you had a question.
Yeah, I think actually, if I understand correctly, there are now three different, or maybe not different, three evolutions going on, a cosmic involution, a personal involution, the one of the Purusha, and also the the evolution of Prakriti, back out of an involuted state back to the in case of Prakriti, back from the Mula Prakriti, back up to the Para Prakriti. And yeah, can you confirm that? Is that what is going on? Parallel?
Actually, I couldn't hear you very clearly. I mean, you're coming through very soft. I just heard that you're saying that there are three evolutions, but I couldn't hear clearly what are the three evolutions you're talking about. Can you come closer to your mic?
Yes. Yes. I'm asking whether there are three different evolutions going on. The personal one, which would be the Purusha, the evolution of the Purusha, and then there is in the background the cosmic evolution going on, and also we have now an evolution of the Prakriti back from its involuted. All of those states are involuted states, back to from the Mula Prakriti back to the high up to the Para Prakriti. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, yes, that is what is going on. So there is, again, to repeat what you said, which is true. There is a evolution of cosmic nature that is going on. This may be considered the cosmic Kundalini, which is unfolding in time, historically. Now, there is also the individual Kundalini, the individual Prakriti that is evolving, that can be sped up, accelerated, so that there is a kind of an evolution of one's capacities and powers, and ultimately of even the possibility of exceeding our prakritic bounds by yogic power. And there is an evolution of the Purusha, not of the Atman. The Atman does not evolve,
Right.
but of the Purusha, of the individual Purusha, which is, which is taking its stations according to what Prakriti allows it, up until the mental being. And then at the level of the mental being, this Purusha, at the individual level, discovers its power to reverse the scheme and thereby accelerate the progress or the evolution of Prakriti and of itself. First at the individual level, but then at the cosmic level.
I have also been a little bit intrigued by a perhaps more trivial point, that is the one which was, we spoke about that just earlier, regarding a physical organ that could or should or may develop in the course of our finding back the way into a supramentalization. And we have been speaking about that earlier, and that whether it is probable that such an additional physical organ could or would develop. And when I was pondering this later on, I noticed that I found this personally more and more probable, more and more possible, and even probable, and even perhaps even necessary, and for the body, for the supermind to, and for the body, which will also undergo changes more and more, to develop an additional receptacle, kind of a receptive organ, perhaps, something which will enable the entire psychophysical evolution to progress. Yeah. And
You're talking about the Buddha's
exactly that.
yeah,
Yes.
super brain.
Oh,
Organ.
Yeah, well, I just recently read that the brain actually gains in increases with the content, with the nature, according to the nature of thought. I read that as was a scientific finding, study, that our brain actually increases also in size according to the nature of thoughts. Now, this is an enormous, this is quite an enormous finding. So it adds to our tremendous responsibility in this actual process, in our actual process of personal and cosmic evolution.
No, it's possible, and actually, as you said, it's quite probable even that this might happen, or this might accompany our evolution at the Prakritic level. But, you know, I mean, it is, I would say, we cannot tell at what stage that might happen. Because as you know, even in the case of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, there were not any extra physical manifestations. And yet they were in these spiritual states operating at a much further than normal human evolution sort of, I mean, capacity of evolution. See? So I think, yes, it's very probable that at some point, and maybe not at the same point for everybody, physical manifestations may start appearing that will reflect this truth. It has not yet happened because we have not yet diversified sufficiently as post-human beings. But that is also part of the evolution. There will appear a time where we are as transitional beings will be much clearer, so that there is a greater amount of diversity in terms of who we are as forms.
What do you mean exactly by we have not enough diversified? What has to happen here exactly?
Our identity as human beings is still pretty narrow in a kind of a defined sense. Our humanism is still taken for granted to a large extent. But if this evolution continues with this reversal of the relationship between Purusha and Prakriti, who we are as human beings will become much more hazy. This is the reason why.
Much more what?
Hazy, not clearly defined.
Okay,
we will be transitional beings. We will experience humanity as a transitional species. We won't just be talking about it. We'll be literally experiencing it.
Yeah. I just wanted to add one more quick remark, that is, this is also aided or hastened, I believe, by a tremendous transcendental light force or influx of light, which is presently, I believe, many are saying that also, there are many voices even from scientific sources, this a tremendous amount of transcendental light which is flooding the earth, an influx, and this process is aided, I believe, what will happen to our bodies by this influx, by this influence.
So that's yeah. So what you said originally, that about the three kinds of evolution, that is, I mean, what Sri Aurobindo is telling us is that those kinds of evolutions are also mediated by the process from above. See, this is why the descent from Sri Aurobindo and the mother have worked extensively for this part of the process, for the descent from above, the active participation of the para prakriti, of the purusha from above, of the purushottama. You see, so this is the reason why our receptivity is very low, but it's being prepared right now. That's what's being prepared, the receptivity, and it's working on the lower levels. That's why we are seeing such tremendous
disturbance.
Yeah, it's such a difficult time through which we are passing.
Yeah.
It's almost the opposite of what we might expect when we are talking about tremendous influx of light. We are experiencing exactly the opposite, because
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
what is happening, it's like we are being forced to respond. Without the response from below, the force from above can't do anything. It's preparing the receptivity so that there is a widespread response from below. It can't come from one or two people. It has to be the human condition.
Yeah.
Jonathan,
I just hope.
Jean-Michel, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I was just thinking from what I studied in the agenda, that the divine potential of consciousness of the cells is something that might lead to the possibility of having a physical body that can take any form, that is not bound to forms anyway. It's something completely different that probably can take any form, can appear, can disappear, can actually a physical body that becomes this bridge. So it can become subtler and go to all the dimensions and somehow become but it is still physical without with the possibility of coming back. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, sure. That's the what Mother calls plasticity. She defines it like that, and this is in the Ashta Siddhi system. It's the Anima Siddhi. So those certainly are the capacities of a future body, but that does not mean that we will not arrive at it at different stages.
Yeah.
Everybody will come to it at a certain point, and in the meantime there may be other manifestations that take place in the body that reflect a certain kind of a stability of some occult action.
Yeah, and then from this standpoint, the question I wanted to ask, it's also, we discussed it a bit with Jonathan. We had some talk about it yesterday, is that some people believe, like disciples that I met even in Paris, I mean, that the yoga, that the mother opened the possibility for the yoga to start at the level of the cells. So those people would immediately attempt to work at this level. And some other people seem not to embrace that. And so as we are going to to Oroville, and I feel this is part of the split between people that happened in this community, that those different approaches. And yeah, so I wanted your thoughts on specifically this. I think you mentioned that in Paris also you met a person that believed in that it was exclusively the body. The yoga is now, it's only, you know,
Yeah,
the force,
yeah, there
the
are
contact of
people.
the force with the body.
There are people who interpret the mother's last years like that. And you
Yeah.
know, I mean, the thing is that we are in a very experimental phase, and yeah, everything is possible. And if you know, like Sri Aurobindo keeps saying, it's if you can do it, that's the proof. You know, I mean,
Mhm.
ultimately we have to try to do whatever we are led to do, and there are safer paths and more experimental paths, and one has to go by the direction that one is being shown.
Of his inner being, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Justin, I think the last comment question for today.
I keep coming back to the term desha. That somehow that the sense there was E.E. Cummings, the poet, said that love is a place. And I'm wondering about the atomization, the nimadi of ego consciousness into desha, into different ways in which it comes together in a place rather than a single ego in this.
Yeah, so you know that's where you have to ask the question, why the sacrifice of Purusha? You know, because if the sacrifice of Purusha is, you know, what is the sacrifice of Purusha? Sacrifice of Purusha is a kind of, and to what is what is it, and to what is it? What are you sacrificing to? What is Purusha sacrificing to? It's sacrificing to its opposite, right? To its reverse. And the reverse possibilities of Purusha, right? Which is, one of them is consciousness. That which is conscious becomes unconscious, right? Which opens up the possibility of evolution. You cannot evolve unless you've lost your capacity to be everything, right? Another is power. In other words, you are omnipotent, as they say, omnipresence, omnipotent, and omniscience, right? Knowledge, but also unity. In other words, there is just one. It's an absolute unity with no place. You see, there can't be place if there is just one, right? The pulverization of the one into its infinite differences immediately creates location. See, so this locatedness is something to which the Purusha is sacrificing. See, the one is sacrificing to its potential for being many, becoming many. So the question why is really at the heart of this, and the answer to the question why of the sacrifice of Purusha from its unity to its multiplicity, it's sacrificing its unity to its multiplicity, is to know itself as a play. It's the play of the many, the Leela of the many, experiencing its own delight as a play, as relationality. So then that becomes the basis of it. But the falsehood of it, so there's a truth of it and a falsehood of it. Just like in the Isha Upanishad, there is a, you know, by the way, those any of you who are interested, I'm going to give a talk on the Isha Upanishad this evening. which will be tomorrow morning for you. And I can send the link to the group. But, you
Nice.
know, there is a truth to the avidya and a falsehood to the avidya. There is a truth to the avidya. The truth to the avidya is differentiation without division. You see, we seem to be divided, but we are actually not divided. The psychic being knows that. The falsehood to the avidya is differentiation, which experiences itself as division. So location, as you pointed out, you know, this desha or loka, from which location comes, is the ability to bind oneself to a context and become individualized while knowing that the individuation and the individualization are a self-experience for the purposes of relationality and play. Space, which is necessary for, you know, dispersion and relation. Okay, so I think we're at the end of today's meeting. And I think we won't have classes in August, but we'll be coming together in September again. And I will send out the link for today's, tomorrow's for you, for those who are not in India, talk for the Isha Upanishad on this list.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, Debashish.
Debashish, would it be possible to send the recording of this very session relatively soon, or at least before that
Sure.
long gap?
Yeah.
Kindly, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Debbie.
you.
That
Thank you so
was an
much.
awesome class. Many thanks.
Yes.
Thank you so
And
much.
Thank you.
Comprehensive learning.
See you all.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye
Thanks.
bye.
Bye, Debashish. Bye, Keika.